For a mere $3, he acquired her, a mountain woman overlooked by every man. Widower Luke Avery's sole intention was to offer her employment and a roof over her head. However, the moment she spoke her name, his entire world was irrevocably altered. The auction was drawing to a close when Luke Avery noticed her. No one was actively bidding anymore, or rather, not truly. The majority of the men had grown indifferent once the livestock and horses had been sold. What stood tethered to the post now was not merely property, it was a person. She was of considerable height, with broad shoulders, her hair unkempt as if it had never encountered a comb, and her hands appeared strong enough to fracture a man's skull. Her attire was little more than tattered remnants. They referred to her as the Mountain Woman, claiming she had been discovered living in isolation among the elevated ridges, much like a wild creature, surviving by trapping and hunting. $3, the auctioneer bellowed. That's all I require. $3 for a diligent worker, a sturdy back, sustenance in small quantities, a quiet disposition. Who will take her? A wave of amusement rippled through the attendees. Several men exchanged nudges, making lewd remarks that Luke deliberately ignored. This was not what he had intended to purchase. He had come seeking fencing wire and seeds, perhaps a mule if it sold at a low price. But then his thoughts turned to his 2 young children awaiting him at the ranch. Young Sam, merely 9 years of age, striving to embody a man's responsibility prematurely, and the little one, June, not yet 6, who still inquired about her mother at night time. Luke's wife had been gone for nearly a year. The household had grown progressively quieter, and the farm tasks accumulated at a pace he struggled to manage. The land remained indifferent to his grief. It simply demanded constant attention. $3, the auctioneer called out once more, his voice now laced with weariness. Someone relieve me of this burden. Luke raised his hand. I will take her. A murmur of surprise spread among the few men who remained. No one else offered a bid. No one else desired her. Sold. The auctioneer brought his palm down forcefully on the table. To the widower, $3. Luke stepped forward, pressing the coins into the man's hand. The woman then turned her head slightly, just enough for him to perceive her eyes, a striking shade of grey, sharp and keenly observant. The auctioneer untied the rope and extended it towards Luke. She is yours now. Best of luck. Luke disregarded the subsequent laughter as he led her away from the post. She walked without faltering, without displaying any sign of shame. She simply proceeded beside him in silence, her long strides nearly matching his own. He observed her as they approached his wagon. For a moment she remained speechless. Then, in a voice as rugged as coarse gravel, she responded, Mara. Luke stopped short. He had not heard that name in nearly 15 years. The journey back home was lengthy and arduous. The wagon creaked as they transitioned from the town into the undulating hills. Mara sat beside him on the bench, utterly still, her hands clasped in her lap as if she had been sculpted from stone. Luke found himself unable to dislodge the name from his thoughts. Mara. Years prior, before he had met his wife, before he had become a father, there had existed another chapter in his life, one he seldom discussed. Mara was a name from that forgotten past. By the time the ranch came into view, the sun was descending, casting the sky in hues of orange and crimson. The house appeared smaller than usual, a solitary silhouette against the vast expanse of the land. Sam was positioned in front, diligently splitting kindling with an axe far too substantial for his small frame. He dropped it the instant he spotted the wagon. June emerged from the porch, barefoot, her curls bouncing as she called out for her father. Luke dismounted. Got someone to help around here? He inquired gruffly, gesturing towards Mara. Her name is Mara. She'll be staying. Sam stared at her. June, a picture of shyness, retreated behind her father's leg. Mara offered a single nod of greeting before turning to lift a sack of feed from the wagon as if it possessed negligible weight. Sam's eyes widened in astonishment, but he remained silent. That evening, after the day's chores were concluded and the children had retired for the night, Luke sat at the table, his gaze fixed upon Mara across the lamplight. "You are not from this vicinity," he stated at last. "No," she replied, her voice low. "You knew me at one time. It was not a question." Her grey eyes met his directly. "I did." A shiver coursed through him. "Why did you consent to be sold?" he inquired. She did not flinch. "Because $3 is preferable to starvation, and because I wish to ascertain if you remembered me." Luke's breath hitched. Memories he had deeply suppressed began to resurface, of a younger, more impetuous Luke, brimming with unbridled energy, and of a woman who had departed before he could inadvertently jeopardize her future. However, before he could utter another word, a sharp rapping echoed from the door. Luke sprang to his feet, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm. No one ever knocked on his door after dark. He strode across the room and flung it open. Standing there was a man he had not encountered in years, a smile as predatory as a wolf's fixed upon his face. "Well?" the man drawled, stepping across the threshold without invitation. "Avery, I didn't anticipate finding you in this remote location. And observe this, you've acquired some companionship." Luke's stomach plummeted as if turning to ice. The man's gaze drifted to Mara, and his eyes gleamed with immediate recognition. "Well now," he murmured softly, "isn't this a surprise?" The man filled the doorway as though he held dominion over the night. Dusty boots, a coat weathered by extensive travel, and a grin that failed to reach his eyes. Luke's posture stiffened. He had not seen Eli Warren in over a decade, yet the intervening years had altered him little. Eli possessed a veneer of charm that concealed a core of corruption, a silken voice, dexterous hands, and an uncanny ability to manipulate every situation to his advantage. Luke's hand instinctively moved towards the rifle mounted by the hearth, only to halt himself. "Eli," Luke stated, his voice tight with apprehension, "I did not anticipate such a greeting." "Didn't know you'd gotten so humble, Luke," Eli drawled, advancing further into the room. His gaze swept across the modest furnishings, the neatly arranged children's boots near the door, and finally settled on Mara. "Mara," Eli pronounced, his tone slow and deliberate, as if relishing a forgotten flavor. "I hadn't expected to encounter you again either." Mara's jaw tightened. She offered no response. Luke's mind raced. Eli Warren of all people, and Mara recognized him as well. "What do you want?" Luke demanded flatly. Eli shrugged, spreading his hands as if he had merely dropped by for neighborly conversation. "Just passing through, saw a familiar wagon. Thought I'd extend my greetings." But Luke knew Eli better than that. He never traversed any distance without a specific objective. The silence stretched between them, taut as a drawn bowstring. "A pleasant establishment you have here," Eli remarked at length, surveying the interior. "2 children, a woman. It almost appears as though you've reassembled a family." Luke stepped forward, interposing himself between Eli and the table, where Mara sat rigid as a statue. "State your purpose, Eli." Eli smirked. "Very well. Word has it there are individuals seeking Mara in the Northern Territories, individuals with substantial resources. If you surrender her to me, I shall depart, and you will never hear from me again." Luke's chest tightened. He glanced at Mara. She remained unperturbed. She did not dispute the claim. Eli leaned against the doorframe, as relaxed as a patron in a saloon. "She's worth considerably more than $3, Avery, worth a great deal more, and you and I are both aware that finances have been rather strained since you laid your wife to rest." The barb struck with the force of a physical blow, yet Luke did not yield. "Leave," Luke instructed quietly. Eli tilted his head. "Are you certain? Consider the children. Land such as this can consume a man if he cannot sustain it. I am extending an offer of escape." Luke's jaw clenched. "I told you to leave." The smirk vanished. Eli took a step forward, the atmosphere in the room growing palpably darker. Be cautious, Luke. You always considered yourself superior to me, but you and I are cut from the same cloth. We both understand how to acquire what we desire. Mara finally rose, her chair scraping loudly against the wooden floor. You will take nothing, she declared, her voice low but resolute. Eli turned towards her deliberately, his eyes glinting with a sharp light. You always possessed a formidable spirit. It is a shame you squandered it on the wrong man. Luke stepped between them. Eli emitted a single, cold, humorless laugh. Very well, keep her, but do not say I did not issue a warning. He brushed past Luke and wrenched the door open. Before departing, he cast a backward glance, his eyes as piercing as shards of glass. They will come for her, Luke, and when they do, you will regret not accepting my offer. The door slammed shut behind him. The room remained eerily silent long after Eli's footsteps had faded. The fire crackled softly in the hearth. Luke finally turned to Mara. What was that about? He asked. Her face was pale, her hands gripping the edge of the table as if for support. He is not mistaken, she stated after a pause. There are people looking for me, but not for the reasons he suspects. Luke waited. Mara's eyes met his. I was not born in those mountains, she confessed. I fled there because the man I was meant to marry murdered my brother, and his family desires my death for speaking the truth. The words struck with a profound, chilling impact. Luke slowly sank back into his chair, memories resurfacing of his last encounter with Mara years ago. She had been younger then, spirited and unafraid to champion her convictions. He had once cherished her, perhaps even loved her in a fashion, but she had departed before their intertwined lives could become irrevocably damaged. And now here she was at his table, with peril pursuing her closely. That night Luke experienced scant sleep. Every rustle of the wind, every groan of the aging structure of the house sent him to his feet, scanning the windows. Mara remained by the fire until dawn, meticulously sharpening a hunting knife as if it were an ingrained instinct. Sam stirred first, rubbing his eyes as he sat up on the pallet near the hearth. Pa, he whispered. Luke motioned for him to remain silent. Go wake your sister. Get your boots on. Mara glanced up. Do you think he will return? Luke nodded. Eli does not abandon his pursuits. If he states they are coming, then they are indeed coming. By the time the sun crested the hills, Luke had saddled the horses, packed their essential provisions, and extinguished the fire. Sam assisted in loading the rifles, his young face etched with a grim resolve far beyond his years. June clung to Mara's hand, quiet but with wide, apprehensive eyes. As Luke tightened the final strap on the wagon, he gazed across the land, his land. The act of leaving felt akin to experiencing another loss, but he had already endured enough grief. They set out before the morning mist had fully dissipated, the wagon wheels creaking softly over the frost-hardened ground. Mara rode beside Luke once more, silent, her grey eyes scanning the distant horizon. This is my fault, she stated softly. No, Luke countered. This is Eli's transgression and whoever is accompanying him. She did not dispute his assertion, but her hands remained tightly clenched in her lap. Hours elapsed in an atmosphere of heavy quietude. Every turn in the trail seemed fraught with potential danger, and then danger materialized. The initial shot pierced the still air, splintering the wagon rail adjacent to Luke's head. Sam cried out. June ducked instinctively, clutching Mara tightly. Luke shouted for them to hold steady, yanking the reins as the horses surged forward. Figures emerged from the edge of the trees. 3 horsemen, their faces obscured, weapons drawn. Mara snatched up a rifle, wheeled around and fired. One assailant recoiled, clutching his arm as his mount bucked erratically. A second projectile ripped through the wagon's canvas cover, narrowly missing Sam's head. Luke steered the horses sharply toward the river bend, his pulse pounding, intimately familiar with this route and its perilous constriction where their only hope might lie. "Brace yourselves," he yelled. The wagon jolted violently into a deep rut, nearly overturning, eliciting a scream from June. Behind them, the pursuers were closing the distance rapidly. Luke's gut clenched with dread as he recognized the precipice ahead. A sheer cliff face dropped directly into the river below, and the horses showed no signs of slowing. The incline rose too abruptly. The wagon wheels shrieked against the rocky terrain. Luke hauled back on the reins with all his might, but the horses panicked, skidded and scraped on the frozen ground. The edge loomed nearer, 10 feet, then 5. At that critical moment, Mara moved with decisive action, vaulting from the seat and gripping the lead horse's bridle with both hands. "Hold fast," she roared, her voice slicing through the din. The horse reared, its powerful muscles straining, eyes rolling white. Mara held on with the tenacity of someone wrestling a mountain, digging her heels into the earth, every sinew in her arms bulging as she fought to pull the terrified animals back from the brink. The wagon tilted precariously, one wheel lifting off the ground. Sam cried out, shielding June against his chest. "Mara!" Luke bellowed, leaping from his perch to brace his shoulder against the wagon's frame, his boot slipping on the loose soil. With a final monumental effort, Mara wrenched the lead horse's head around. The team stumbled back a single step, providing Luke the crucial instant to slam his weight down and level the wagon just as it teetered on the edge. For a fleeting moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. Then another shot cracked through the air. The bullet struck the wagon bed, sending splinters flying. Mara spun, rifle in hand, and fired in a single seamless motion. The closest rider's hat was torn away as he ducked, his horse veering sharply. Luke scrambled back onto the bench, snapping the reins. The horses lurched forward once more, this time away from the precipice, their hooves pounding along the rocky track. The pursuers quickly reformed. 2 broke off to flank them, while the 3rd charged directly at them. "Sam, under the tarp, hold your sister," Luke commanded. The boy didn't hesitate, pulling June down with him just as another bullet perforated the canvas. Mara fired again, the impact jolting her shoulder, yet she remained unyielding. Her shot found the lead rider's horse in the flank, sending it careening sideways into a thicket of brush and rocks. Only 2 remained. They rode with relentless fury, one angling ahead towards the narrow passage Luke had intended to use. "They're trying to trap us," Mara shouted. Luke's jaw tightened. He knew this territory intimately, but not with a wagon, not with 2 children in the back. He snapped the reins and veered sharply towards the river crossing. The water would be frigid, the current swift, but it was their only recourse. The wagon careened down the embankment, its wheels jarring over roots and stones. The river came into view, a broad, turbulent expanse of grey water, mist rising from its surface. Behind them, the thunder of hooves grew closer. Luke didn't pause to deliberate. He drove the team straight into the shallows. Icy water surged over the sides, instantly drenching their boots and coats. The horses whinnied, battling the powerful current, but they pressed onward, their muscles straining as the wagon groaned under the river's force. Mara swiftly reloaded, her fingers remarkably steady despite the wagon's violent pitching. She fired again, the report echoing across the water. One rider veered away, his horse panicked as the river engulfed its hooves. The last adversary pressed forward, his gaze burning with a fierce determination to overwhelm them, even at the risk of drowning. Luke urged the horses to greater speed, the water now reaching the wagon bed, soaking the tarp where Sam and June huddled. The wheels scraped against unseen rocks beneath the surface, each moment threatening to rip them free. "We're nearly there," Luke shouted. Mara expended her final cartridge. The shot struck true, knocking the rifle from the man's grasp. He cursed, pulling his horse back as the animal struggled in the rushing water. Suddenly, the wagon jolted violently as one wheel collided with a submerged boulder. The axle creaked, wood splintering. "Luke!" Mara cried. He lashed the reins, coaxing the horses forward with every ounce of strength he possessed. The wheel caught again, then, at last, broke free. The wagon lurched up the opposite bank, water streaming from its sides. Luke didn't halt, didn't dare look back, until they were safely on solid ground. When he finally risked a glance over his shoulder, the riders had vanished. They didn't stop until they had put 3 miles between themselves and the river, the wagon groaning with each rotation of its damaged wheels. Luke guided the team into a dense stand of pines, finally allowing the horses to recover. Steam rose from their coats in the biting air, their breaths appearing as harsh clouds. Sam emerged from under the tarp, chilled and trembling, clutching June's hand tightly. "Are you all right?" Luke asked, his voice hoarse. Sam nodded, his teeth chattering. June buried her face in his chest, refusing to look up. Mara slid from the wagon, water dripping from her skirts. She tended to the horses first, her hand stroking their quivering necks before turning to Luke. "We can't continue this way," she stated. "Not with the children, not with a wagon they can trace." Luke rubbed his hand over his face. "We can't go home either. Eli will head there immediately." Mara met his gaze. "Then we head higher into the ridges. They won't pursue us far up there." He studied her, recalling the tales of the woman they called the Wild One, who lived in solitude where few men ventured. "You know the mountains." She nodded once. "Better than anyone." Luke exhaled. "All right, you guide us." They traveled until dusk, the terrain becoming more rugged, the paths narrowing to little more than game trails. Mara moved with an unhesitating grace, her steps so sure-footed it seemed the earth itself had shaped her to traverse it. By the time they made camp, the sky was a deep black, and the children had fallen asleep almost before the campfire had taken hold. Luke sat opposite Mara, the flames casting dancing shadows across her sharp features. "You mentioned they were looking for you," he said softly. She gazed into the fire. "They will not rest until I am dead." "Why?" Her jaw tightened. "Because I spoke the truth, and men like them do not forgive women who choose silence." Luke remained quiet for a moment. He looked at his sleeping children, at Sam curled protectively around June, and a cold, fierce emotion stirred within him. "They will have to get past me first," he declared. Mara's eyes met his. For the first time since he had acquired her, a flicker of something appeared in their depths. Not just defiance, but a hint of hope. However far in the distance, a wolf howled, a long, mournful sound that carried through the pines. Luke's hand instinctively moved towards his rifle. Hope, after all, did not equate to safety, not out here. The night was restless. Every snap of a twig, every gust of wind rustling through the pines had Luke awake and alert, rifle in hand, scanning the darkness. Mara, too, never truly slept. She sat with her back against a tree, a knife resting in her lap, her eyes reflecting the firelight like a creature that had learned survival by remaining perpetually vigilant. By dawn, a thin, brittle layer of frost coated the ground. Luke rose quietly, his boots crunching softly as he checked on the horses. One of them favored a front leg, strained during the river crossing. It would suffice for now, but not for much longer. Mara joined him without a word, crouching to examine the horse's tendons with practiced fingers. "We'll have to traverse the ridge slowly," she stated. "It's too steep for an injured horse." Luke nodded. He wasn't accustomed to taking instructions, but her unwavering certainty made it easy to comply. They broke camp with haste. Sam carried June on his hip, his young face set in a grim resolve that Luke had come to detest seeing on such a young boy. The path ahead ascended sharply, winding in switchbacks carved by deer hooves and the occasional tread of a long-departed trapper. The higher they climbed, the more profound the silence became. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. By midday, they reached a rocky projection offering a panoramic view of the valley. From this vantage point, Luke could see his entire world spread out below. The narrow river, the fragmented mosaic of fields and forests, and far to the east, the faint outline of the town where he had spent $3 and unknowingly reclaimed a piece of his past. Sam joined him, his eyes wide with wonder. "I can see everything." Luke placed a hand on his shoulder. "Yes, but they can see us too. We keep moving." Mara had already scouted ahead, melting into the tree line and reappearing as silently as a wraith. "There's an old trapper's cabin about half a mile further. The roof has collapsed, but the walls are intact." "Will it conceal us?" Luke inquired. Her lips curved slightly. "As long as no one knows where to look." They reached the cabin just before dusk. The structure was little more than 4 log walls, half buried in the earth. The roof had given way under the cumulative weight of years of snow, but it offered shelter, and Luke had learned not to be particular. They set about clearing the debris. Mara worked with an almost elemental force, maneuvering logs twice her size, while Luke cut branches for a new roof frame. Sam attempted to assist, his slender arms struggling with each bundle of brush. "Here," Mara said, her voice softer than Luke had ever heard it. She crouched beside Sam, demonstrating how to weave the branches more tightly. "It's stronger this way." Sam's eyes brightened with quiet pride as he mastered the technique, his chest puffing out slightly. Luke observed them, a peculiar sensation stirring within him. It wasn't merely her strength or her capability. It was the fact that his children, his very own children, were beginning to look at her as if she belonged, and that prospect unnerved him more than Eli Ward ever could. As dusk descended, their makeshift shelter boasted a canopy of pine boughs and bark, providing a shield against the biting wind. The hearth within the humble dwelling radiated a smoky warmth, filling the confined space. It was the first time since abandoning the ranch that June's laughter, soft and tinged with surprise, echoed in the air as if she had forgotten its sound. Luke found his attention drawn to Mara, watching her with an intensity that surprised him. He observed the gentle way she encouraged June to eat, the subtle softening in her grey eyes when Sam proudly displayed a crudely carved figure he'd fashioned with his pocket knife. Later, after the children had drifted to sleep, Luke sat by the fire, Mara beside him. "You were always like this," he murmured quietly. Mara turned her head towards him. "Like what?" "Resilient, as if the very earth couldn't break your spirit." Her gaze drifted back to the flickering flames. "The earth certainly tried to break me. I just refused to yield." Luke studied her profile, illuminated by the firelight, pondering if he had ever truly understood her. The tranquility was fleeting. Around midnight, Luke was jolted awake by the panicked whinnying of the horses. Mara was already on her feet, her knife clutched in her hand. "Stay with the children," Luke whispered, reaching for his rifle. He moved swiftly into the frigid darkness, his breath misting white in the frigid air. The horses shifted nervously at the clearing's edge, their ears pointed intently forward. Then he heard it, the soft crunch of footsteps over the frost, the deliberate rhythm too precise for any wild creature. "Show yourself," Luke commanded, his voice rough. A figure emerged from the gloom, arms raised in surrender. "Easy there, Avery," the man said. Luke's grip on the rifle tightened. Eli. Ward's smile was a discernible curve even in the dim light. "Knew you'd be holed up here? You always did favor the high ground." Luke raised the rifle, but Eli remained unmoving. "Shoot me, and my men will cut you down before you can reload. You know I'm not alone." As if summoned, more shapes materialized from the tree line. 4, 5, 6 of them, a knot of dread tightened in Luke's stomach. "You can't possibly win this," Eli stated softly. "Hand her over, Luke. Take your children and go home." "You'll never see me again." From behind him, Mara's voice cut through the night, sharp and unwavering. "He's not handing me over." Eli's grin widened. There she is, always choosing the losing side. Luke moved closer to Mara, the rifle steady in his hands. "Then I suppose," Eli drawled, his voice smooth as polished stone. "This will have to be settled the hard way." The first shot shattered the silence of the night. Luke fired instinctively, the powerful kick of the rifle jarring his shoulder. One of Eli's men cried out, clutching his arm as he stumbled. "Sam!" June! Luke yelled from within the cabin. Sam scrambled to pull June further into the safety of the structure as bullets ripped through the makeshift roof, sending a shower of bark and pine needles raining down. Mara fired next, her shot precise and deadly. A man crumpled in the snow, his cries echoing in the night. Eli made no move to fire. He simply stood there, a triumphant grin on his face, as if victory were already assured. "Don't you worry, Avery," he bellowed over the din of gunfire. "I'll ensure your children are well cared for once this is over." Fury ignited within Luke. He leaned out from the cabin's damaged entryway, sighting down the barrel, and fired at the mocking smile. The bullet missed by a mere inch, shearing a lock of hair from Eli's head. The smug expression finally faltered. "You're finished," Eli spat. Then the world erupted in a cacophony of gunfire. Inside the cabin, June shrieked as a bullet splintered the log wall mere inches from her head. Sam threw himself over her, his small hands trembling, but his jaw set with defiance. Mara ducked low, reloading with practiced speed. She moved with the fluid grace of someone who had faced such peril before, as if danger had been her constant companion for years. "Luke!" she yelled. "We can't hold this position." He fired 2 more rounds, then ducked back as bullets gouged the doorway. "Where?" Mara's eyes darted towards the rear wall, the one that overlooked a steep drop into the dense forest. "We jump," she declared. Luke stared at her. "It's 20 feet down. Better than waiting to be killed." She slung the rifle over her shoulder and gathered June, holding her tightly against her chest. "Sam, stay with your father," she commanded. Luke fired 1 last shot, then turned, his heart hammering against his ribs. He scooped Sam into his arms and met Mara's gaze. "Go!" The last image Luke registered before leaping into the abyss was Eli's face, contorted in pure rage, the muzzle flash illuminating his teeth like those of a ravenous wolf. Then they were plummeting, branches lashing past, the ground hurtling towards them, and all went black. Pain brought him back to consciousness, not a sharp agony, but a dull, persistent ache that settled deep within his ribs, refusing to recede. Luke's eyes fluttered open to a muted grey light and the sighing of wind through the trees. He lay on his back, partially buried in pine needles and snowmelt, his coat ripped and sodden. For a fleeting moment, he couldn't recall how he'd arrived there. Then fragments of memory returned. The roar of gunfire, Mara's urgent shout, the weight of Sam in his arms, and the sensation of the cabin wall giving way beneath their feet. He pushed himself up quickly, the movement sending a groan of pain through his chest. His side throbbed with a fiery intensity. He had likely fractured a rib or 2. It didn't matter. He twisted, his eyes scanning the undergrowth. Sam. A faint cough answered him from 10 feet away. Luke scrambled forward, his hands burning with the cold. Sam was huddled behind a mossy boulder, a shallow gash bleeding on his forehead, but alive and conscious. His eyes, wide with fear, met Luke's. "June," he rasped. Luke's stomach twisted. "I don't know," he admitted. "I don't." Then he heard it. The rapid crunch of footsteps through snow and broken branches. He turned, rifle halfway raised, and froze. Mara emerged from the trees, June cradled protectively against her chest, a pistol clutched in one hand. Her braid had come undone, and mud streaked one side of her face, while blood soaked the sleeve of her shirt, but she didn't falter. Without a second thought, Luke surged towards them, dropping to his knees. June stirred in Mara's embrace, a soft whimper escaping her lips. "She's all right," Mara panted. "Just hit her head, scared." Luke reached out gently, his hand stroking June's hair. She blinked up at him, her expression one of confusion, but she was awake. An overwhelming wave of relief washed over him, nearly buckling his knees. Mara remained on her feet. "We need to keep moving." Luke nodded, already helping Sam to stand. Behind them, faint and distant, the sounds of shouting grew louder. "They found the cabin," Luke muttered. "It won't take them long to find our trail." Mara scanned the ridgeline. "There's a ravine ahead, narrow but steep. We can lose them in there." "How far?" 2 miles, perhaps less." Sam leaned into Luke's side, his limp noticeable, but his face set with determination. "I can do it," he declared, and so they moved, quickly and silently, weaving between the pine trunks and patches of snow that gleamed like shattered glass in the morning light. Every sound from behind them sent a jolt of tension through Luke's spine. Mara led the way, despite her injury. She never slowed, never looked back, and Luke watched her, this woman he had purchased for $3, who now held his daughter as if she were her own, who moved with unwavering purpose through blood, ice and gunfire, as if born to such trials. He didn't voice it, but something within him began to mend, something that had been sealed away since the day Clara was laid to rest. The ravine was a jagged scar upon the earth, steep and narrow, its bottom shrouded in shadow. Mara descended first, sliding down on her heels, bracing herself with one hand. Luke carefully passed June to her, then helped Sam navigate the descent. The canyon walls closed in around them as they pressed onward, the air growing colder. Icicles clung to rocky ledges, and the dripping of melting frost echoed with every step. They paused only once, seeking refuge in a shallow cave, no deeper than a forgotten den. Luke placed a hand on Mara's arm, the first genuine touch they had shared since that night on the ranch. "You're bleeding," he stated. "I know. Let me see." She hesitated, then sat. Luke peeled back the torn fabric. The wound was not deep, but it had already saturated through multiple layers of clothing. He cleaned it with melted snow and tore a strip from his shirt to bind it. Mara remained stoic, not flinching. "How did you learn to fight like that?" Luke inquired as he worked. She glanced at him. "Because I had to." "There's more to it than that." Mara's jaw tightened, but then she sighed. "After my brother died, I ran. Thought I could stay hidden in the hills, but I wasn't the only one running. I found others, mostly women, some with stories far worse than mine. We kept each other alive, taught each other what the world wouldn't." Luke looked at her hands, calloused and scarred, undeniably strong. "Do you ever wonder what it would be like if we'd stayed in touch?" he asked softly. Mara didn't respond immediately. Then she met his gaze, unwavering this time. "Sometimes, but back then you weren't ready for someone like me." Luke nodded once. "Perhaps not." She leaned forward, resting her head against the cold stone wall. "But you are now." Silence settled between them, a palpable presence. They remained in the ravine through the night, foregoing fire and any source of noise. Sam curled up next to June, both too utterly exhausted to do more than sleep. Mara kept watch. Luke offered to share the duty, but she shook her head. "You trust too easily," she stated. "That's how men like Eli thrive." By dawn, fresh snow had blanketed their tracks, but Luke knew better than to believe they were truly safe. They moved again, venturing deeper into the hills where the trees grew stunted and the air became thin. Around midday, they arrived at a rocky pass, characterized by wind-carved cliffs and jagged crags resembling broken teeth. Mara halted, surveying the terrain. "There," she said, pointing to a jagged overhang. "An old mining camp. Haven't been used in years." They scrambled towards it, ascending the ridge. Sam slipped once, nearly falling, but Luke caught him swiftly. Just as they reached the ledge, a sound broke the profound stillness. Gunfire, distant but distinct. Luke spun around. Men were ascending the ridge below them. Eli's men, 6 at least, perhaps more. Mara swore under her breath. "They've got dogs." Luke scanned the abandoned camp. 2 dilapidated shacks, a rusted water drum, and a mine entrance choked with debris. "We hold here," he declared. "We're too exposed to run, and it's too steep to climb higher." Mara didn't argue. She knelt by the mine entrance, prying loose boards from a crate. "Have you ever made a trap, Luke?" He raised an eyebrow. "Plenty." "Why?" "Because if we die up here," she said, stuffing a torn satchel with powder from a broken stick of dynamite, "we're taking some of them with us." They rigged it quickly. A single narrow path led to their position. Every other option presented either a sheer precipice or sharp, unyielding rock. Mara carefully placed the satchel beneath an overhang of stone, securing it with a cord that looped back to her belt. "Trigger the detonator," she instructed, "and the ensuing explosion will block the passage." Luke expressed his concern, deeming it a hazardous undertaking. Mara glanced at him, her intention to survive evident. They took up positions behind the abandoned fuel container and a partially collapsed wall, their rifles at the ready. Sam and June sought refuge within one of the derelict structures, concealed amongst various containers. The second hand on the clock crawled by, then a disturbance. A figure emerged at the crest of the incline. Eli, his rifle slung across his shoulders, bore a chillingly placid smile. 3 more men followed in his wake. "She's not visible yet," one of them remarked. "She's here," Eli countered. "I can sense her presence." Luke adjusted the sights on his rifle, his breathing controlled. Mara remained vigilant, her hand hovering near the wire. "Any final sentiments?" she inquired without turning to Luke. He paused for a moment before replying, "Then you were always valued at more than $3. Mara's lips curved slightly, a gesture almost a smile. Eli advanced closer. Suddenly, Sam's voice rang out from within the shack, laced with panic. "June, she's not breathing." Luke froze. Mara did as well, but Eli continued his charge. Luke turned, his mind divided between protecting his daughter and confronting the threat. Mara's sharp command, "I've got this," conveyed her self-reliance. "Go!" Luke sprinted towards the shack as the cacophony of gunfire erupted around him. Behind him, the world detonated. The concussive force reverberated through the hillside, akin to thunder resonating from the very earth. Boulders tumbled down the confined track, obstructing the sole ascent. Dust and rock fragments filled the atmosphere, irritating Luke's eyes as he navigated the smoky haze towards the shack. Inside, Sam knelt beside June, his face pale and his body trembling. She lay inert in his embrace, her lips tinged with blue, her breath shallow and intermittent before ceasing entirely. "No, no, no, no," Luke choked out, sinking to his knees. He lifted her, his hands unsteady as he tilted her head back. "Dad!" Sam's voice cracked thick with dread. Luke acted instinctively. He placed his mouth over June's, forcing air into her small lungs, then applied rhythmic pressure to her chest with steady, urgent hands. "Come on, my girl, come on, breathe." There was no response. He continued his efforts, his heart pounding so loudly it drowned out the gunfire outside. Sam wept beside him. "Please, June, please wake up." Then a ragged, faint inhale. Her tiny chest rose, convulsed, and then rose again. Luke exhaled a breath so sharp it was almost a sob. He cradled her close, rocking her against his chest as her breathing gradually normalized. Sam rested his forehead against her arm, tears coursing freely. "Now you stay with me, June," Luke whispered, his voice hoarse. "You stay right here." Gunfire still punctuated the air outside. Luke forced himself to look up, holding June tightly. Through the fractured wall, he could see Mara positioned behind the drum, her rifle resting against her shoulder. She was bleeding again, fresh crimson staining her side, yet she remained steadfast. Her shots were precise and deliberate, each one felling an assailant. Eli, however, remained on his feet. He had been propelled backward by the blast, but had somehow navigated the debris, his face streaked with dirt and fury. "Mara!" Luke bellowed, gently placing June down beside Sam. "Watch the left flank." She reacted swiftly, redirecting her aim just in time to intercept a man attempting to outflank them. Eli smirked, his teeth stark white against his grimy face. "You're running low on ammunition, girl," Mara retorted. "Still have enough for you?" Luke snatched his rifle and charged from the shack, firing as he advanced. A single shot grazed Eli's shoulder, spinning him around. However, the man did not falter. He surged forward, wielding the butt of his rifle like a bludgeon. It struck Mara's forearm with a sickening crack, sending her weapon clattering away. She snarled, lunging at him unarmed. They both fell heavily to the ground, Eli pinning her beneath his weight, his fingers closing around her throat. Luke sprinted forward, his veins surging with rage. "Get off her!" he roared, slamming into Eli with full force. The two men grappled across the dirt, exchanging blows with fists, boots, and teeth. Eli fought with the ferocity of a man who had anticipated this confrontation for years. "You believe you can claim what is mine, Avery?" he spat, blood trickling from his mouth. "You think a fragile woman like her belongs to you?" Luke's fist connected with his jaw. "She belongs to no one." Eli's hand went to a knife at his belt, the blade glinting as he drove it upwards. Luke intercepted his wrist just in time, his muscles straining as the sharp edge neared his ribs. "No!" Sam screamed from the shack's entrance. Luke gritted his teeth, every muscle burning. "Stay back!" Eli twisted, a grin spreading across his blood-streaked face. "She's not worth it, Luke. Never was." Luke's rage intensified, burning white-hot. She was worth everything. With a roar, he wrenched Eli's hand away and slammed his head against the ground once, twice, until the man lay motionless. Luke staggered back, his chest heaving, the knife clattering from Eli's limp fingers. Mara coughed, rolling onto her side, her hand pressed to her throat. "You took your time," she rasped. Luke extended his hand. She gazed at it for a moment before accepting it, allowing him to help her stand. "Are you all right?" Her voice was strained but steady. "I've endured worse." Behind them, the remaining adversaries retreated down the ridge, dragging their injured companions. The explosion had obliterated their only clear route of ascent. Luke stood over Eli's unconscious form, his rifle heavy in his hands. "Are you going to kill him?" Mara inquired softly. He looked down at the man who had pursued them for days, who had nearly taken everything from him. For a long moment, Luke remained silent. Then he slung his rifle over his shoulder. "No," he stated. "He lives, knowing he was defeated." They worked efficiently. Mara bound her arm with another strip of fabric, while Luke dragged Eli's inert body to the debris-strewn path. He secured the man to a tree with his own belt and rope, just enough to prevent him from succumbing to his wounds, but not enough for him to escape readily. By the time they finished, the sky was beginning to darken towards evening. Inside the shack, Sam sat with June nestled against him, feeding her small pieces of stale biscuit with trembling hands. Luke knelt before them. "You both performed admirably," he said softly. Sam looked up, his face still streaked with dirt and tears. "Is it over?" Luke met Mara's gaze. Her expression was unreadable. "For the present," Luke replied finally. That night they remained in the dilapidated encampment. The fire burned low, concealed from view by the broken wall. Luke sat with his back against the stones, June asleep in his arms, Sam nestled beside him. Mara leaned against the opposite wall, her eyes half closed, but as alert as ever. After an extended silence, Luke spoke. "You never shared your name, your true name." Mara's gaze shifted to his. For the first time, the usual barriers between them seemed to vanish, her mask removed. "Eden," she said softly. "My name is Eden." Luke blinked. His late wife's middle name had been Eden. The fire crackled gently, and for a prolonged moment neither of them spoke. Yet something within Luke shifted, as if the final piece of a complex puzzle had finally fallen into place. She hadn't simply been a stranger he'd acquired for $3. She was destined to be there. The wind picked up outside, whispering through the pines like a harbinger, for Eli Ward might have suffered a defeat today, but Luke knew he would return, and the next time there would be no escaping. Morning dawned, cold and crisp, with a brittle frost still clinging to the stones of the ruined camp. Luke awoke stiff and sore, his side aching with every breath. However, June's gentle weight in his arms provided a sense of grounding. She was warm, her breathing now steady, her tiny hand clasped firmly in his shirt. Mara Eden was already awake, crouched by the fire pit, coaxing a few lingering embers back to life. Her face was pale from blood loss, but her eyes were clear and alert. Luke carefully handed June to Sam, who had settled against him at some point during the night, and then stood. He stepped out into the early light, surveying the ridge below. The path remained obstructed from the previous night's detonation. A jagged wall of stone and earth sealed them off from that direction. Eli's body was gone. Luke felt a knot tighten in his stomach. Someone had come for him. Eden appeared beside him, silent as always. She followed his gaze to the empty tree where Eli had been secured. "He's free." "Yes." Sam's small voice emerged from behind them. "What happens now, Dad?" Luke turned slowly. His son stood in the doorway of the shack, June clinging to his hand. Both appeared far too aged for their years. Luke knelt to their level. "Now we go home." Sam frowned. "Home, but he'll come for us." Luke nodded. "I know, but we can't keep running forever." Eden stepped closer, adjusting the rifle slung across her uninjured shoulder. "He won't stop. Men like him never do." Luke met her eyes. "Then we stop him." They travelled throughout the day, descending from the high ridge and navigating through hidden game trails known intimately by Eden. She walked slightly ahead, leading with a confidence that felt both reassuring and poignant to Luke. All those years apart, and she had evolved into someone entirely different, someone who had survived out of sheer necessity. By mid-afternoon, they reached the boundary of Luke's property. The ranch stood silent in the distance, smoke no longer rising from the chimney, fences partially buried under drifts of snow. It appeared deserted, hollow. Sam's grip on Luke's sleeve tightened. "It doesn't look like home anymore," he whispered. Luke placed a hand on his shoulder. "That's why we're going to fix it." The cabin felt unfamiliar as they stepped inside, like a memory that no longer fit. Dust coated the table. Tools lay scattered where they had been dropped the night of the attack. Luke set June down near the hearth and knelt to build a fire. Eden began quietly clearing the table, restoring order to the room as if she had always belonged there. Sam assisted without being asked, gathering scattered tools and arranging them neatly. A sense of easing settled in Luke's chest as the room gradually transformed. It wasn't completely repaired, but it was no longer broken. That night, after the children had fallen asleep, Luke sat at the table while Eden meticulously mended her arm. "You didn't have to return," he said quietly. She kept her gaze averted. "I've told you, I'm not abandoning them." Luke observed her intently, the flickering firelight reflecting in her steely grey eyes. "And what about me?" She paused for a beat, then gently placed the fabric aside. "And you," she confirmed, her voice a soft murmur. A quiet settled between them, weighty but not unwelcome. Eventually, Luke broke the silence. "I laid Clara to rest on that rise beyond the orchard. She deserved a far better man than I was back in those days." Eden met his steady gaze. "You are not that man any longer." Luke swallowed with evident effort. "I want to be a better man for them, for you." A faint smile touched her lips, subtle yet significant. "Then be better." The days that followed were marked by a subdued calm, yet an underlying tension persisted. Luke busied himself with repairing the perimeter fencing, felling wood, and tending to the stable operations, while Eden cared for the livestock and assisted Sam with teaching June her initial words. Despite their industriousness, neither allowed their guard to falter. One morning, unfamiliar tracks surfaced near the property line, boot impressions in the freshly fallen snow that clearly did not belong to them. Eden was the first to notice, dropping into a low crouch to examine the print's depth and detail. "He's nearby," she stated grimly. Luke felt the gravity of her observation settle heavily in his stomach. That evening, as snow began to descend in gentle, unhurried flakes, Luke tucked Sam and June into their beds. He lingered a moment longer than usual, cherishing the sight of their tranquil faces, imprinting every detail onto his memory. Then he stepped outside to where Eden stood waiting, her rifle resting casually across her back. "Are you thinking what I'm thinking?" she inquired quietly. Luke gave a decisive nod. "We'll settle this tomorrow." Her jaw tightened, but she offered no protest. "Then tonight's rest might be our last opportunity." They remained there for an extended period, standing shoulder to shoulder, the biting cold stinging their cheeks, until Luke finally reached out and took her hand. She did not withdraw it. The following morning dawned crisp and silent. Luke rose before the sun, leaving Eden asleep near the hearth. He saddled his horse, thoroughly checked his rifle, and returned inside. Sam was already seated at the table, his eyes red-rimmed. "You're going after him, aren't you?" Luke knelt down. "I am, but I'll be back before you know it." Sam regarded him for a long moment before giving a single resolute nod. "Bring her back too." Luke's throat constricted. "I will." Eden emerged a moment later, already prepared for the journey. "You didn't imagine you were leaving without me?" Luke offered no argument. They mounted their horses and rode out, leaving the children secure within the cabin's confines. Neither spoke as the ranch receded behind them, the vast empty terrain stretching out beneath the pale winter sun. Both understood there was no possibility of turning back now. By midday, they located the tracks once more. They followed them through the dense woods, across frigid streams, and onward towards the undulating hills. Luke sensed it before he saw it, a palpable tension in the air, an unnerving silence from the birds. Eden slowed her horse, her gaze meticulously scanning the surrounding trees. "He's here!" A voice, sharp and resonant, cut through the pines. "You should have stayed away, Avery." Eli Ward emerged from behind a towering tree, his rifle held ready, a malevolent smile contorting his features. "You returned for her," he stated, gesturing towards Eden. "I should have known. You always had a soft spot for the broken." Luke remained immobile. "Amusing. You always had a penchant for losing." Eli's grin widened. "Let's bring this to an end." Luke dismounted deliberately, his rifle held steady. Eden slid from her horse, her eyes fixed intently on Eli. The forest fell utterly silent, save for the soft crunch of snow beneath their boots. Eli raised his rifle. Luke mirrored the action, and the world seemed to hold its breath. The initial shot exploded like thunder, its echo reverberating through the trees. Luke threw himself sideways, snow erupting precisely where he had stood moments before. Eli's bullet gouged a furrow through the tree trunk behind him. Eden moved with a startling swiftness, undeterred by her injuries. She darted low, utilizing a fallen log for cover, her eyes sharp and unwavering. She returned fire, the crack of her rifle measured and precise. The shot grazed Eli's coat, close enough to elicit a curse and send him stumbling behind another tree. Luke rolled, his boots digging into the snow as he rose to a kneeling position. He aimed, then fired. Shards of wood exploded from the tree, shielding Eli. Eli erupted in wild, sharp laughter. "You believe you can defeat me, Avery? You lack the capacity." Luke's jaw clenched. He shifted to a more advantageous position, his heart pounding fiercely. He wasn't solely fighting for himself. He was fighting for Sam, for June, for Eden. Eden glanced his way, their eyes meeting for the briefest of instants. It was an unspoken communication, a clear understanding. "One of us must finish this." Eli fired again. The bullet whizzed past Eden's ear, so close she flinched, but did not falter. Luke maneuvered to flank him, his boots making soft crunching sounds in the snow. The confrontation devolved into a brutal, tense struggle. Eli proved cunning, constantly repositioning himself, never allowing himself to be cornered. However, Luke possessed a superior knowledge of the terrain. He circled wide, compelling Eli towards a narrow ravine where the snow lay deeper, presenting a treacherous footing. Eli stepped back, and his foot sank into the snow. That was the opening Luke needed. He surged forward, colliding with Eli. The two men fell hard, their rifles skittering away into the snow. Eli struck first, a fist connecting sharply with Luke's jaw. White-hot pain exploded through him, but Luke pressed on. He grappled, his teeth gritted, attempting to secure Eli's knife hand. Eden sprinted towards them, her rifle forgotten, a mixture of fear and fury etched on her face. "Luke!" The knife flashed. Eli drove it downward, the blade plunging deep into Luke's shoulder. Luke roared in agony, but seized Eli's wrist, wrenching it with all his might. The knife clattered free. Eli swung again, his fists flying wildly, but Luke blocked the blows with his forearm and drove his own fist square into Eli's jaw. Once, twice. The third impact sent Eli sprawling into the snow, blood gushing from his nose and mouth. He lay there, gasping, defeated but not incapacitated. Luke stood over him, his chest heaving, blood seeping hot down his arm. He raised the rifle he had retrieved from the snow. Eden reached him, her breath coming in ragged gasps. "Luke!" He did not look at her. His finger rested on the trigger. "If you kill him," she said softly, "you'll never stop looking over your shoulder, but if you don't, he will return." Luke rasped, "You're absolutely right, I will." Eli laughed weakly, spitting blood. "You're damn right I will." Luke gazed down at him for a long, heavy moment. Then slowly he lowered the rifle. "You'll languish in the sheriff's jail," he stated coldly. "You'll die there, forgotten. That is a far worse fate than what I would deliver now." Eli's eyes widened as Luke stepped back. Eden offered no dissent. Together they bound his hands and feet, dragging him to a nearby tree. Luke secured him tightly with rope until he could barely move. "You haven't seen the last of me," Eli snarled through bloodied teeth. Luke met his gaze steadily. "You have already lost." They departed, leaving him there, confident that the sheriff's men would discover him soon enough. The journey home was conducted in silence. Snowflakes drifted lazily from the heavens, softening the surrounding landscape. Luke's shoulder throbbed with each movement of his horse, yet Eden's steady presence beside him seemed to somehow mitigate the pain. As the ranch finally came into view, Sam burst from the doorway. June held tightly against his chest. "You're back," Sam yelled, relief flooding his voice. Luke dismounted, barely maintaining his balance. Sam rushed towards him, embracing him tightly. June wriggled free, reaching up for her father. Luke knelt, drawing both children into his arms despite the searing pain. "It's over," he whispered. "We are safe." Eden dismounted slowly, observing the scene with a rare, gentle expression that Luke had never witnessed on her face before. Sam turned to her, his eyes wide with curiosity. "Are you staying?" Eden paused for a moment, glancing towards Luke. He remained silent, simply holding her gaze with unwavering steadiness, waiting. Her lips curved into the smallest, most delicate smile. "If you'll have me." Sam beamed, his grin so wide it was almost painful to behold. June, still clasping her father's hand, reached for Eden's. Eden took it. That night, after the children had fallen asleep, Luke stood by the window, gazing out at the moonlit hills. Eden joined him, her presence a comforting warmth despite the surrounding chill. "You could have ended him," she remarked softly. "I considered it, but you chose not to." Luke looked at her. "Because of you." Eden tilted her head slightly. "What happens now, Luke Avery?" He inhaled deeply, feeling the burden of past events finally begin to lift. He turned to face her fully. "Now we construct something superior." Her eyes searched his for a long moment. and then, for the very first time, she smiled, a genuine smile, small but undeniably certain. But far in the distance, concealed within the darkness of the woods, another pair of eyes observed the ranch from the tree line. For some men never truly relinquished their failures, and Luke Avery's struggle was far from concluded. Winter yielded its grip gradually, akin to a weary hand releasing its hold. Weeks elapsed, and the ranch slowly regained its equilibrium. Luke diligently mended fences, with Sam by his side, imparting the skill of driving each nail true. Eden, still tender in her injured arm, adapted to navigating the cabin as if she had always belonged there, preparing meals with Sam, reading to June by the fire, and fetching water whenever Luke neglected to ask for assistance. There was laughter now, genuine, uninhibited laughter, the kind Luke believed he had interred with Clara. June toddled after Eden incessantly, her small hands clinging to Eden's skirts as though fearful of her disappearance should she let go. Sam, more reserved than his sister, began to regard Eden not merely as a stranger. Luke often found himself observing these interactions with quiet wonder. At times, in the midst of the day, he would pause, hammer in hand, dirt smudged on his boots, and simply inhale. For the first time in many years, the ranch felt truly alive. Yet he never allowed his rifle to be kept beyond easy reach. The initial indication appeared in the form of a dead crow, impaled on the fence post bordering the east pasture. Luke discovered it before Sam did. He carefully pried it down, his jaw set firmly, and buried it beneath the snow before the boy could witness it. Eden noticed his subdued demeanor at supper. "What troubles you?" she inquired softly. He hesitated. "Nothing that warrants the children's concern." She regarded him with an expression that conveyed her complete disbelief. Later that evening, once the children were asleep, she stood by the window, her arms crossed. "He has returned." Luke offered no reply. "You should have ended him," she murmured. Luke stared into the fire. "Perhaps, but that would have rendered me indistinguishable from him." Eden studied him for a considerable duration. "You are nothing like him." The ensuing days were marked by a pervasive sense of restlessness. Tracks emerged in the snow near the outbuilding, always positioned just far enough away to appear accidental, never close enough to apprehend anyone in the act. Sam started rousing in the darkness, speaking of hearing someone, while Luke remained wakeful for extended periods, a rifle resting across his lap in anticipation. Eden kept close to the children, but Luke observed her. He noted the way her hand instinctively brushed the knife at her hip and how her gaze darted towards every passing shadow. The individual who had been menacing them had not departed. He had merely changed his tactics. It was just after dawn when events escalated. Luke stepped outside with Sam, intending to collect water from the nearby stream. The air was crisp and still, a layer of frost blanketing the ground. They had only progressed halfway when Luke detected it. The thunderous pounding of hooves, rapid and forceful. He instinctively pushed Sam behind him. "Run to the house. Get your sister. Go." Sam hesitated for a mere moment before sprinting away. Luke turned just as a rider crested the nearby slope. Eli Ward, appearing pale and worn, yet undeniably alive. His rifle was already leveled. Luke fired first. The projectile struck Eli's shoulder, causing him to spin sideways in the saddle. However, the man did not relinquish his seat. He returned fire, his bullet grazing Luke's flank with a searing burst of intense pain. Luke stumbled, gritting his teeth, but maintained his grip on the rifle. The cabin door burst open. Eden emerged, cradling June against her chest, with Sam close behind, brandishing a pistol far too large for his grasp. "Get inside," Luke commanded. Eden disregarded his instruction. She placed June into Sam's arms. "Take her. Don't stop running." Sam's eyes widened. "Go," Eden urged. Sam complied, racing across the clearing, June crying out in his embrace. Eli spotted them. His grin widened, a cruel and unpleasant expression. "Looks like I still win?" Luke fired again, but Eli had already directed his rifle towards the children. Eden acted without hesitation. She ran. A shot rang out. For a fleeting instant, Luke feared he had lost her, but Eden lunged, tackling Eli cleanly from his horse. They tumbled into the snow, his rifle flying from his grip. Luke rushed towards them, every muscle protesting, his side bleeding hot liquid down his shirt. Eli snarled, seizing Eden's injured arm and twisting it forcefully. She cried out, but held firm, driving her knee into his ribs with considerable power. Luke reached them just as Eli broke free, drawing a pistol from his belt. Luke fired without aiming. The shot struck Eli squarely in the chest. The man's eyes widened in disbelief as blood began to stain his coat. He slumped back into the snow, remaining silent. Luke slowly lowered the rifle, his breathing labored. Eden gazed at Eli's motionless form for a prolonged period, her chest rising and falling in shallow, rapid breaths. Finally, she looked up at Luke. "It's over." He nodded once, still trembling, uncertain of his belief. Sam returned across the yard, June still crying in his arms. "Pa," he shouted, "is he gone?" Luke reached out, drawing both children to him. "Yeah," he said softly, "he's gone." Eden knelt beside them, her uninjured hand stroking June's cheek. For the first time in weeks, the tension on her face eased. That night, Luke interred Eli Ward on the edge of their property, marking the burial site with nothing more than a rough-hewn stone. Eden stood beside him, quiet, her hand resting gently on his arm. When it was complete, they walked back to the cabin together. Inside, Sam and June were nestled near the fireplace, both fast asleep. Luke observed them for a while before turning to Eden. "You could leave now," he stated quietly. Her eyebrows drew together. "Do you want me to?" He shook his head. "I want you to stay, but I won't compel you if you don't feel you should." Eden's gaze softened. "Luke, this is the first place that has felt like home in years. I'm not leaving." Luke moved closer, his hand brushing against hers. "Then we'll start anew," he said softly. Eden's lips curved into a subtle smile. "We already have." But as the spring thaw arrived, news of what had transpired with Eli Ward began to circulate in the neighboring communities. Not all of his associates were as prepared to let the matter rest as Luke had hoped. The conflict was not concluded. Not yet. Spring arrived early that year, melting the snow into streams that carved through the fields, leaving the earth rich and dark. Life revitalized the ranch. Fences were repaired, new calves bellowed in the barn, and for the first time since Clara's passing, Luke Avery felt the burden on his chest lighten enough for him to breathe freely. Eden, no longer just Eden the stranger, Eden the runaway, moved about the cabin as if she had always belonged. Sam had ceased flinching at every sudden noise. June laughed more often than she cried. However, the world beyond their land had not forgotten. One warm evening, as the sun sank low, painting the hills in hues of gold, Luke noticed two riders approaching from the ridge. He recognized they were not law enforcement by their relaxed yet presumptuous posture in their saddles. Eden also registered their presence. She stood on the porch, wiping her hands on her apron. Her expression remained composed, though her hand rested lightly on the knife at her waist. Luke met them midway, his rifle slung casually but within easy reach. The older of the two men, a slender individual with sun-weathered skin and a harsh smile, spoke first. "Eli Ward's dead. You put him in the ground." Luke offered no reply. The man leaned forward in his saddle. "Eli was my brother." The silence lingered. Luke's jaw tightened. "Are you looking to join him?" The man chuckled, a slow, chilling sound. "Not tonight, but men like us don't forgive, and we certainly don't forget." They turned their horses without another word and rode away, leaving a trail of dust behind them. Eden joined Luke as he watched them depart. "They'll be back." Luke nodded slowly. "I know." The subsequent days passed in a state of apprehensive quiet. Luke instructed Sam on rifle usage, emphasizing not only how to fire, but also when restraint was necessary. Eden spent her evenings teaching June her letters by the firelight, her voice gentle and steady. But when night fell, Luke remained awake long after everyone else had retired, listening for the sound of approaching horses that never came. Weeks later, the riders reappeared. Luke was mending the southern fence when he heard the cry. Eden's voice, sharp and raw, pierced the stillness. He dropped his hammer and ran. 2 men had entered the barn. Sam stood in the doorway, clutching the pistol Luke had given him, his face pale but resolute. June hid behind Eden's skirts, weeping. The slender man, the one who had identified himself as Eli's brother, had a weapon aimed at Eden. "You should have left this land when you had the chance," he sneered. Luke didn't pause to deliberate. He fired. The man collapsed, blood spreading across his chest. The second rider turned his weapon towards Luke, but Sam, his hands trembling, fired first. The bullet struck its mark, felling the man where he stood. Silence descended. The scent of gunpowder permeated the air. Sam's hand shook uncontrollably as he lowered the pistol. Luke crouched before him, gripping his shoulders firmly. "You're all right, son. You did what you had to." Sam nodded weakly, his eyes welling with tears. Later, as they buried the men beneath the cold, hard earth, Eden spoke softly. "You can't escape this life, Luke." "Not really. There will always be more of them." Luke pressed the shovel into the soil, then allowed them to proceed. Eden regarded him for a considerable time, an unspoken understanding passing between them. Finally, she said, "You've changed." Luke glanced at her. "So have you." That night, the 4 of them sat together by the fire. Sam leaned against Luke's side. June curled up in Eden's lap. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, Luke did not feel like a man anticipating the world taking everything from him. He felt like a man who possessed something worth defending, and someone to stand beside him in that defense. Spring transitioned into summer. The land turned verdant. The ranch teemed with calves and wildflowers. Eden's laughter now filled the cabin, soft yet genuine. Sam grew taller, stronger. June began to form complete sentences, her small voice carrying across the yard as she pursued barn cats. And though vestiges of the past would forever linger on the horizon, Luke Avery no longer feared them, because when they inevitably arrived, he would not be confronting them alone. Eden stood beside him on the porch one evening, observing Sam teaching June to toss stones into the creek. "Do you regret it?" she inquired softly. Luke shook his head. "Buying you for $3. She raised an eyebrow. He offered a faint smile. "Best damn money I ever spent." Eden laughed, a sound Luke had never anticipated hearing from her. And for once, it felt as though the struggle had been worthwhile, because from the remnants of their respective losses, they had constructed something new, something akin to a family, and no man alive would be permitted to seize that from them again.